Hey everyone, welcome back to the Global Medical Device Podcast. My name is Etienne Nichols. I'll be the host for today's episode. Today we want to talk about the government shutdown. When the government shuts down, what does it mean for MedTech? So it's been 21 days at the time of recording since the government shut down. The FDA's contacts may have gone dark, submissions may be frozen. We're going to find out a little bit more about that. If a company's investors are asking questions you can't answer, what are you supposed to do? What happens to medical devices when Washington goes quiet? That's what we're going to be digging into today. Not going to get into politics. We're not going to try to make anyone panic. We're just going to give the facts and what smart medtech leaders can do right now to protect their runway. To help us cut through the noise and kind of answer some of these questions is someone who's seen this from both sides of the fence. His name is Michael Nilo. He's the president and principal consultant of Nilo Medical Consulting Group. He helps companies all around the world build regulatory strategies, prepare submissions, and keep their systems inspection ready. Before that, Michael was on the inside. He spent nearly 6 years as a biomedical engineer and scientific reviewer at the FDA, working across dental and cardiovascular devices, even serving in policy roles at the Center Director's Office. And since leaving the agency, he's advised teams from startups to Medtronic on IDEs, PMAs, breakthrough designations, you name it. He knows exactly what happens inside the industry when the lights go out. And I'm sure I missed something. And I also want to mention one caveat. I did not give him questions ahead of time. Michael has been gracious enough to take this interview anyway. So thank you so much for your patience. If there's anything that you don't want to answer, feel free to punt. But how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. You know me. I'll do my best to answer everything, but
Yeah.
we'll see where we go. And appreciate. Thank you so much for the introduction and having me on today. And hopefully I can provide some insights here.
Yeah. Well, I guess the first question I would ask is what really happens or what stops at the FDA during a shutdown?
So I went through two shutdowns as a reviewer at the FDA, and initially, really nothing stops except the what does stop is new stuff. The FDA's ability to process new user fee um, supported submissions, and those are going to be your marketing applications, your PMAs, your de novos, your 510Ks, 513Gs. Those will stop. You can't, there's no one there to process those. They don't take on new work. But you can kind of think it that the FDA running with a big water reserve of money. And so essential tasks, which start with most things, and they start cutting as the water runs out, that pool of money starts to run out, which was supported by the 9 months before of user fee generation. Other things start to go. But honestly, we're 21 days into this shutdown. There doesn't look to be a real end in sight, but that can change on a day-to-day basis. Congress is talking about coming back to work to have those discussions this week. So maybe we might be done by next week. But active review of device submissions. If you already had something in or you were smart enough, you saw the writing on the wall, you got it in on September 30th, you're good to go. Those will still keep going on schedule and the FDA is going to try to meet their MDUFA goals with those. Post-market safety surveillance. So you're still required to do all your reporting. Don't slouch on that just because you think the government's not there. The FDA is still working. Audits, especially audits that are part of PMA reviews, those preliminary article inspection ones, they're still ongoing. We have clients right now that are in the middle of audits, both on manufacturing facilities for QSITs and for preliminary pre-market audits for PMA level devices. All of your emergency response type things. If there's a bad adverse event and signal, the FDA is still tasked with communicating and enforcing recalls through the shutdown. And the last one that's actually a pretty key one are IDE reviews. So if you're trying to start your clinical trial, you can move forward with your submission to uh, start your trial, and the FDA is still going to commit to reviewing that within 30 days. But there are stuff that slows and stops, which I'm assuming is
Yeah, well, let's talk about the things that stop because I'm guessing that's probably the things people would be most concerned about as well.
right. So the big things and I think the things that the FDA promotes the most and talks the most about that do slow down and stop are all of those the pre-submissions and interactive reviews and stuff that's not tied to previously negotiated MDUFA goals and money. So it's free to submit a Q-sub, and a lot of the guidances, especially on the more accelerated pathways like TAP program or breakthrough or STEP, all state as resources allow, as the big caveat of if something like this happens, the resources have to be focused on essential tasks. Now, we've had some success with our existing pre-submission meetings are still on the calendar. We still plan to have them. The FDA, the reviewers are being communicative. I think most of them are still there. But as this drags on, again, that reserve goes down and the ability to have these types of interactions is less and less. More people will get furloughed. I remember when I was at the agency, I forget what year it was, but I think the shutdown lasted about 30 days or 28 days. And I it stunk at first because all my other Fed employees were like, sweet, day off tomorrow. We're not going to work. It's expecting it to last a couple of days. And I had to go to work. But then as it got longer, they were furloughed, so their paychecks weren't there, and they were getting increasingly scared and frustrated. And I was still at work. And then toward the end, the FDA people started getting furloughed after day 21, day 22. We started losing a little bit more of the team, people who weren't working on those big ticket IDEs or
Yeah.
PMAs and things that had shorter deadlines. So you'll see some of those go down. The FDA, right before shutdown happened, put out a list of their priorities for guidances and new policies for fiscal year 2026. All of that's on hold. That's not happening right now. You're not going to get new policy around this time. Routine inspections are likely down, although we have seen them continue. I think that's one of the ones that if they were scheduled or already paid for, they're happening. But if this continues into November, I could see those routine ones evaporating pretty quickly. And then, like I mentioned before, new submissions that require user fees, user fee processing, that is currently nothing is being processed if it requires a payment. And the last
Quick.
thing that I wanted to
Yeah,
mention,
go ahead.
sorry, is, and this is kind of important because there is a time lag, is we aren't sure right now. We've had mixed communication from the agency on whether small business designations are being processed. And that's a pretty big deal if you are if you are a new medical device manufacturer who's submitting or small manufacturer that's submitting a 510(k) or PMA here in the first part of fiscal year 2026, if that can't get processed, then your user fee will be astronomically higher. And often, even when the government's open, that processing takes, 6 weeks. So if you have to wait till the government reopens, file your small business designation, and then wait 6 more weeks till you actually submit, time is money for startups, and that's going to could be a big lag there. So you'll have to make some choices.
Yeah, that's interesting. And we mentioned MDUFA a couple times. I wonder if it's worth mentioning and maybe explaining what that is and how it affects people.
Sorry, yeah, former government employee, so you get stuck in the alphabet soup sometimes. MDUFA stands for Medical Device User Fee. I think it's authorization, might be agreement. I forget what the A stands for,
It might
but
be amendment, but I'll look
amendment.
it up while you talk about it. Yeah.
The A is not important.
No.
What it does mean is that um, unlike a lot of federal agencies, the FDA gets I think it's a majority of their funding now from user fees. So companies pay to have their submissions reviewed. This helps fund all of the FDA's activities. So while a portion of the money comes from taxpayers, a large portion of the money also comes from these user fees. And therefore, when the government shuts down and that tax supported part goes away, there's still the industry supported part of the FDA's activities that can be maintained during this time. And that's that pool of money that I was talking about.
Yeah, and I think that's important to think about too, because I see people in the industry sometimes saying, okay, medical device companies are in the FDA's pocket. They're paying all this money to have their devices reviewed and so on. But really, that's not necessarily what it looks like to somebody on the outside. What they're doing is paying for an expedited review so that these timelines don't just get astronomical. Is that accurate, or anything to add there?
I that's pretty accurate. It's not even the expedited, it's just the normal timeline. There you can't pay. I think it's important to know is you can't pay more to have something go faster. That's not part of the model. It is just a standard fee. And actually, I think it's really important to note that advocacy groups on both industry and patient advocacy groups have really pushed hard in these negotiations for with Congress to allow for reduced fees for the smaller medical device companies so that there isn't kind of a consolidation to just the bigger players and then it would look I think even more like it's a pay to play
Yeah,
system, but there's an allowance to let um, kind of everyone have a seat at the table.
yeah. I think that's good clarification. For a company that's actually going through trying to get their submission, what are the actual effects on that company typically that you've seen?
Um, as through the government shutdown, I think the big one is, especially for smaller companies, they really need to take advantage of that Q submission process, that pre-submission, those conversations and interactive review with the agency. I think the medical device group in CDRH really utilizes interactive review during submissions to reach out to industry and ask questions interactively. And it's a huge benefit to medical device companies to have that interaction. If you ever do work on the drug side, um, it's less like that. It's more of a black box, and they have very firm decisions, pretty in a different manner of interaction. So losing that, I think, is going to have an effect. The other part is the obvious effect. If you were ready and you're like, hey, our corporate goal was to have our 510(k) submitted in October of 2025, if the government shut down, you're not getting that goal. And every day you're still required to kind of maintain your company and pay the daily fee of running the company, but you're not any closer to generating revenue because your 510(k) is not in-house or your PMA is not at the FDA. And there might be some, you know, tough decisions that have to get made, or it's maybe look toward other ways to generate revenue, to bridge the gap and things like that, some strategies.
Yeah. I'm sure you work with a lot of different companies. Are there any piece of advice that you're giving them, or maybe started to think about, what am I going to tell my customers? I'm just watching this government shutdown thing. Any piece of advice?
Yeah, right now, for the companies that we saw this on like looming, so we did try to get as much of the user fees things into the FDA, even some that might have had something that we would have normally waited for, but we tried to get them in-house. Can't do anything about that now for current companies. I think um, if you're basically being forced to keep your submission on hold while you wait for this, I think better and take advantage of the extra time, which all the time gets eaten up for regulatory people, to hit deadlines. Take advantage of the extra time to make your submission more easily navigable, make a better executive summary, make better links to the attachments, kind of make it a better product because that will help when the lights go back on at the FDA. And as I mentioned, they really haven't totally slowed down, but they will the longer this goes. All these new submissions that are in queue just stacked, we're going to hit the FDA's desk all at once. So if yours stands out as being something that is easier to handle, makes it easier to process, they can navigate through it better, you have a better chance of getting a quicker, faster, better review process once it's opened up. Um, the other thing we talk to our clients about is take the useful time and get your claims support, your quality system, your risk management, stuff that you were gonna potentially wait on working on until after the submission went in, because there's always that huge push. Well, now, what time's better than now if the regulatory people are twiddling their thumbs? So,
Yeah, that's a good point. Start doing some things in parallel that maybe you were going to wait on. I think that's a really good way to look at that. Do you have any suggestions on how firms can handle communication with investors, partners? Any thoughts there?
Um, I think when the something as large as the FDA shuts down and the US federal government shuts down, I think it's one of those things of, uncontrollable natural disaster, essentially, the the hurricane, it's what are you going to do? I think, but everyone's in the same boat, and I think everyone's fairly aware. There's no magic solution to tell the investor, hey, I'm gonna do some sneaky thing to get the FDA to review this. It's just, I think you tell them we're working on other aspects for commercial launch, your reimbursement plan, your market access plans, so that, you can show them that there's going to be value right away at FDA clearance or FDA approval rather than, what might have been in the plan is there might have been a gap, FDA approval, then something. We're working toward shortening that gap on the back end is the best thing I think we can tell the boards.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about a lot of the different things when I was getting close to the end of product development and we're really tightening up all of the submissions and verification and testing. All of those things can be really refined slightly, I suppose. Any other thoughts as far as those things that you can be doing right now? Maybe, things are shut down, but there's things you can be doing right now. I love all of the different processes you brought up.
No, I mean, I think you hit a great nail on the head too of process validation. How do you make something more manufacturable? I mean, ultimately, things like a government shutdown have major effects on patient health. And so if you can kind of, the goal for everyone in the industry is to get these new technologies out in the hands of patients and doctors to use it. And I think it's can be discouraging when you see these kind of arguments affect that. But if you kind of spin it to, like you said, there's more time to work on other things that the business still needs. And I think, and could make it so that, hey, we were planning on being able to make 100 of these and we were going to 100% verify every single one by hand because that's the only thing we thought we'd have time to do. Well, go validate some of your processes, get some better machining tools, like use the time. Just because regulatory is only one work stream in a product launch, so there's plenty of other things that
Yeah.
can be done. And I do think a lot of boards think of it as like, well, once we do that, once we get through the FDA, we're good to go. And it's only a step along the way. So I think there's a lot of things you can kind of be working on that makes you more attractive for exit or better commercial launch or more access in the hospitals, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. It's a good balanced approach. I love the education you kind of provide through this because a regulatory expert, let's say someone's working in a medical device company and someone's coming to them saying, "Hey, okay, so what's the plan? What are we doing?" Uh, maybe that's it's a little bit late as far as right now because it's happening right now. So you've already had to answer those questions, I'm sure. But next year, or well, whenever the next time comes around, the preparation you can do. You mentioned we saw this looming. If you just kind of look ahead and you say, okay, I know there's going to be the potential for a shutdown. These are the things we're going to do to get ahead of this. I think that's a smart way to just approach things. So that's good. If nothing else, just to raise awareness that there are activities you can do to help your outcome in the long run.
Yeah. And I think you can look back on the history of some of these shutdowns and, historically they've lasted, as short as a couple of days, but, more often than not, they're, 2 weeks to a month, right?
Yeah.
And I think one in 2019, right when I started consulting pretty early in my consulting thing, it was like 35 days. And, if if you plan for that, okay, the last budget resolution, you know, wraps up March 1st, probably want to put those kind of big things on your device calendar so are we going to be able to submit something before that date? Or is our timeline more than 30 days after that date and that shutdown shouldn't affect us that much? Those are kind of things to look at.
Yeah. So I'm curious, so if you zoomed out and just looked at this, are there any things that we could do that would, I mean, just as an industry, I mean, you've worked on both sides of the fence. it's bigger than just medical device. It's bigger than all of those things. Any pieces of advice though you have from a larger, maybe a broader standpoint, in being able to tell, even if you mentioned looming, is that, and I guess I keep going back to your looking
Yeah.
ahead, um, how to see around corners. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I without getting too like I don't want to get stuck in a political thing,
Right.
but I think given the state of the US government and administrative, it is common for the last 20 years to resolve things by just shutting it down.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so if I think we can almost anticipate there is a somewhat, moving forward, we can anticipate that when the current agreement for budget expires, and sometimes that's 3 months, sometimes it's 2 years, we should expect some sort of political turmoil around that next decision. Nobody seems to want to play nice in the sandbox anymore. So, and everyone takes their ball and goes home. So right
Yeah.
now, Washington's not even in session. So so I think when we talk about this kind of stuff and say it's looming, it doesn't
I know
really,
what you mean.
we
Yeah.
don't need mirrors to peek around corners. It's kind of staring us in the face.
Yeah.
So,
It's funny, and I agree. I don't want to get too far in. I had a colleague tell me once. He said, it's funny how uh they're not able to get it in behind locked closed doors and talk very much anymore. Everything's so out in the open, so you almost have to take your hardline stances. It's really a shame. But um, any last piece of advice you give to medical device companies trying to make sure that they're doing the right things right now? I know you've already given a lot of advice and education, but kind of as we shut this down.
the pep talk is just that, remember what the mission is. You're making things for patients and you're making people's lives better. And, um, you know, while the government might not be helping support that effort right now, the FDA themselves, the people on the front lines of that regulatory, they are still working hard. And so I think you should be looking internally and not, keep the goal in mind and keep working where you can. It's the
Yeah,
best advice we can do.
that's good. Great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Those who've been listening, thank you so much for listening to the Global Medical Device Podcast. We'll let you guys get back to it. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.